Welcome to the High Performance Herd. We're so fortunate today to have Chris Condon, the founder of Aircon AI, with us today, talking about his company. We've had a chance to talk a little bit in the last few days. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Dave. I appreciate you having me. I really enjoyed our conversation last week, so it was great.
Yeah. So I always kind of start with the typical question of what drew you into leadership. If you think back and said, hey, here was an early thought about leadership. Here's some time where I knew I wanted to build something bigger than myself. What was kind of that genesis of leadership for you?
Huh, that's a great question. I'm not sure if I ever actually had a moment that said, have a grow something bigger than you. I always just thought that I was a leader. In fact, when I was a child, fifth and sixth grade, we had David Fishman was my teacher, and I used to get in trouble all the time. Right, like I don't want to be a leader. And he goes, Chris, it doesn't matter. Life's not fair. You are who you are. So deal with it.
And if you jump forward and kind of give us, here's my professional career, Cliff Notes version, up until the point you joined Start Aircon, that'd be great just to ground the audience. And then we'll talk a little bit about Aircon and then dive into how you've created a high performing herd.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I started off as a laborer, forklift driver, and worked my way up through warehousing distribution through different companies, so Tower Group, FedEx, to Expeditors. And along the way, I went into different products, right? So warehouse distribution, air cargo was my last one at Expeditors, and that's really where I fell in love with air freight. But I every role from inventory control to forklift to different management levels throughout my career.
And at Expeditors, which I think last time you talked about, hey, I learned like just a ton there. Um, Talk about kind of the impact it had on your career, kind of the career acceleration that you had there. Some maybe early leadership ahas.
Well, I think there's definitely several at Expeditors that was a lot of aha moments, especially as you reflect back on your career and like, oh, that's what I learned then, right? Like the when I first moved to El Paso, I'm early in my 20s. I think I was 26 years old. Um, Moved to El Paso. My wife was pregnant with our third child, and we lost our largest customer in the first couple months that we're there. Obviously, not. Let's say I'm going to assume that it wasn't because of me that they made that decision much prior to me coming down there. But the aha moment there, what I taught or what it taught me was that I needed to understand the business and how to sell the business, right? So how does what is the value that you're creating, right? Because it's not just cost and it's not just the access to whatever you're selling. And in this case, was warehouse distribution. It was what are my costs, right? What does the buy model, right, like look like, right? What does my cost model look like? And then what is my value prop to the client, right? Is it just space? Is it speed? Those type of things. So that was kind of the first kind of business standpoint of, oh, you got to learn this stuff. And then the second big aha moment was you got to take risk, right? There was a large contract manufacturer that was moving to town. They had some bad will, or the company had some bad ill feelings with them. And at the time, X Wires was a very entrepreneurial company, right? So it was like basically the district manager and me, the department manager, basically owned the P&L. And so we got on the phone with our RVP, and so my boss and his boss and his boss all on one phone call. And basically, we're told no, not to do it. And then my boss's boss basically said, "Hey, well, you guys heard what the executive VP says or said about him. At the end of the day, it's your business, right? You're going to have to explain it." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, all right. So it may not be my money, right? But I have to be accountable for the decision we're making for the business." So at the end of the day, people do business with people, and we ended up making the right call in that particular situation because it turned out
Yeah.
to be wildly successful.
Awesome. So you leave Expeditors, Trans Trade, Tricon. A little bit about those two opportunities, what you did there, kind of
Yeah,
what
so
your
trans trade was when I left El Paso, went back to Seattle, took on a regional director role for trans trade for a couple of years, grew that business, and then I was asked to take over the company as CEO. So I did that, moved to Dallas. And the logic there was, or the aha moment there was, we turned it around, right? So, and that was 2016, and 2017 was the first year TransTrade made money in over 10 years
Mm.
as an organization. But during that time, kind of my handshake deal of, hey, if we can turn this around, I'm going to need more money. The investor sold to a large private equity firm, and that was gave me the ability to actually buy TransTrade with other private equity money.
Yeah.
Uh, and I rebranded that to Tricon. But note to self, you kind of learn the hardware of private equity. It doesn't always know the cycles of logistics, right? So when COVID hit, everybody got a little nervous, right? But in logistics, that's where they make all your money, right? Like when there's chaos in the world and the world's on fire, logistics people make a lot of, that's their opportunity to solve a problem
Yeah.
and get paid for it.
So, trans trade moves to Tricon. You with PE money buy in, own it, and then there's an exit there. So talk
Yep.
about the Tricon exit.
Yeah, so we end up selling that to Visible Supply Chain, which then a year later they sold to Maersk. I think the deal was like 900 million or $1 billion. So basically, what they rolled up a bunch of smaller freight forwarders or logistics companies, 3PLs, and then bundled that to Maersk. So that was an interesting. How do I say this? An interesting learning experience, where value and where money comes, like how you actually make money, right? Growing up, you always think of, either your hourly salary or those type of things. But really money is not made linear that way, right? It's made on a multidimensional way. And so it was very educational for me, to learn the different aspects of VC to private equity to debt to all those type of things that I just wasn't exposed to as a child.
Well, and even probably in your early career, that was
Right.
mine. Like till you move into a PE role, you're a CEO. There's a bunch of learning that happens there if you haven't done it before.
Yeah.
Which yeah, and there's also learning just about being a CEO. Talk about that for a minute. Like, hey, you had this opportunity, you were chosen as CEO, you transition the company, eventually sell the company, or buy the company sort of, and then sell the company. What would you tell others about that whole experience?
No, I keep going back to know your value in the value chain, for lack of a better way to say it. When you're a CEO or you're running a company that is known, right? Meaning you know what your services are, you know your buy sell things. The perspective changes, yes, as a CEO, right? Like you're not everybody's friends. You got to make hard decisions on P&L. Like we had to lay off a bunch of people, in that first year because we weren't making any money. Um, and learning the fact that you want to make one decision and you think that's going to solve the problem. The reality is that that decision then has a ripple effect on different emotions and different point of views on the employee side of things. And so you really got to think 3 or 4 steps ahead, right? Like this decision is going to make, like I'm laying off of people, like this decision is going to cause people to worry about X, Y, and Z. So how do you combat that, right? So those are the thought process that I didn't really think about prior. Where now that's all I think about, right? Like
Yeah.
it
Um, i- if you think about the Tricon growth to exit, and for a moment go, I get to replay it. Would you do anything different?
yes, I would absolutely do things differently. Not a ton, right? But I would stand my ground more on letting customers push us around a little bit, right? Like, I learned this recently actually is, there's a potential client that I'm dealing with or talking to in Africa, and we were in Shenzhen, China, and we're kind of talking in the hotel lobby, and he goes, "Chris, I don't chase money. I let money chase me." And obviously, at the time, I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of yes, I agree." But in practice, right, we chase the deal, right? We chase oh, this customer might fire us, right? So let's lower our rate. Well, no, know your value. right? Know what we're doing and know the value that you're creating is probably the biggest lesson I've learned over the last year.
And for a moment, if you dive deeper into that, when you go know your value, give us a little more detail what you mean by that.
Um, don't let people, if especially when you're in a new category, right? So like air, got to use Aircon here as an example, right? So our output is the quote, right? So at the end of the day, our system is going to provide a quote that you can put in front of your customer. But what I found is most people think on a linear level, like the quote is just part of the shipment process. But the reality of it is there's lots of decisions that happen to even make sure that quote is good, right? Like, is it feasible? Is your margins and all this stuff? So the language around that is important, but really it's understanding where your value is. It's not the quote, right? The quote's the output of what our solution is doing, right? Or solving, right? So that's really been kind of the unlock for me is like, oh, it's not this workflow, it's an additional workflow on top of that. And we got to be clear about it, right? Don't I don't know how to say this in a different way, but that's been the biggest challenge for me is understanding the value isn't the output, the value is the process.
Got it. Well, and then to be able to articulate that, extract that value, demonstrate that to the customer. I mean, there's a bunch in that you said, but it's important to think about and go, all right, well, yeah, then I need to hold firm because we're doing a lot of things to get this quote out versus minimize and go, hey, this is, you can do it cheaper. Um, so you leave Tricon through exit, sell it to Visible. It looks like a short period of time, and then you're off and starting Aircon. Share with listeners kind of what was that transition? What was I thinking? How did Aircon come about?
Yeah, so Aircon came about really on the Tricon days because I had really good relationships with a lot of good shippers, Marquee, Foxconn, HP, et cetera, et cetera. I could get into the quoting process, right? I could get into the RFQ and opportunities. And as a small freight forwarder, that was massive, right? Because a lot of people won't even look at you because you don't have brand recognition, right? One of the and I'm going to say this because I think it's very relevant. Nobody gets fired for choosing FedEx, right? They get fired because it's a known commodity, it's a known brand, right? And if they lose your shipment or whatnot, you're not going to get fired for it as an operator, right? But you may get fired if something bad happens and not everybody around you knows the brand, right?
Yeah. And before you leave that, that's almost in every industry, right? I
Yeah,
go back to my lab days, and lab managers used to say, "Hey, I'm not going to get fired for choosing Abbott."
yeah, that's right.
And it's the same, across industries that there's some behemoth that everyone is safe choosing,
That's
and
right. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think that it's funny as I go through that. I think that's the another common thing that I've learned, particularly over the last year, is that it doesn't really matter what the business is. It's what problem you're solving in that business that is unique, right? Every business process has accounting. Every business has a sales, some type of value prop. But the rhythm of it is really on what problem you're trying to solve.
Well, it's funny because I do a lot of work with businesses, and everyone for a moment goes, "Oh, we're unique," and I go, "So far, every business I've met only does three things: they get work, they do work, and they get paid."
That's right.
And I
That's
go,
right.
so we all want to say we're all special. I'm like, it all is the same three fundamentals. We got to figure out how we get new work. We then got to go do the work, and then we got to figure out how we get paid.
That's right.
And in the end, as you alluded to, there's a bunch of specialty things inside of that. What problem? How do we do it? What are we leveraging? What's our sustainable competitive advantage? Why can we demand value? All the things that you alluded to early. So sorry to take us down that rabbit hole for a minute, but you decide because you know all of these. I'm going to go frame Aircon.
Well,
I'm
no,
going to
what happened was is we were getting these RFPs or RFQs, and we would win everything except for air freight, right? Like not win, we would compete, right? So I could compete on ocean, I can compete on customs brokerage, we can compete on ocean freight, right? But on air cargo, we weren't even in the ball game, right? So it was actually Microsoft and the lady there, her name was Mary, and I go, hey, I don't want to waste your time. You don't waste my time. And that was the aha moment of like, oh, they're consolidating. So we started we started Aircon as a tech-enabled wholesaler. Um, and that was the logic there was how do we help small to medium-sized freight forwarders compete at scale, right? So by mirroring what the big guys are doing, right? Consolidating, building new LDs, signing big BSAs, long story short there. And as we started that business, we're VC backed, right? So Schematic Ventures gave us some money on basically an idea on a napkin, saying, "Hey, here's our thought. We need some money to go build it." And so we built it. We're growing. I think we were up into like 4.8 to 5 million dollar range. So not massive in the logistics world by any stretch of the imagination, but we were making progress. But what we kept hearing in the market was, Chris, I don't want to go to another platform, right? I don't want
Right.
to go key in the dimensions or destination. I'm just going to send you the email. So our CTO Dennis, with his great mind, built an agent. So this was back in 2023, I believe it was, or maybe early 24. We built an agent to basically take that email, structure it in a manner, put it through our rate engine, and respond. And what we found is that in the first 90 days, the throughput went up 60%. Our win rate stayed about the same, but because of those two factors and obviously market and shipment size and those type things, our revenue went up 2.5x in the first 90 days. And that was this is the game isn't the moving of the cargo. The game is how do we help freight forwarders know what they're committing to, right? And
So
how do we
you
do
and I
that
talked
properly?
about this. You and I talked about this last time. So it's just a lot more at bats. Hey, our win rate, our batting average doesn't change. We just got a lot more at bats. So there's a lot more opportunities to win. Um, and for you, an aha, and we talked last time. Well, then I'm going to pivot a little or a
Yep.
lot, depending on how
Yep.
you think about what you guys did. And so talk about that.
Yeah, so in May of 2025, we went basically redid a seed round. Again, venture back, so Blumberg Capital and Las Olas, both out of Florida. I got to give them a plug there. And we pivoted. So we took basically the last year redoing the system to be customer facing, right? Because before it was internal, right? So we controlled what airlines they could use and margins and all that kind of good stuff. So we had to reconfigure it to be customer facing, right? So in December 2025, we basically strategically walked away from the wholesale business. Um, and we had to make it a one system basically for lack of a better way to say it. We call it our admin panel or our control tower, if you will, on what decisions do you routinely make. And so if the email comes in or the quote request comes in and it fits within these guardrails, it's going to automatically quote for you, right? And so we basically went to market in January. But the big aha moment on that part for me wasn't the at bats per se, because I think a lot of people think of conversion rates on what was won, but the last few weeks has been what did you not win, right? And what does that data tell you? And how do you learn from the demand to convert to more of the shipments, right? So it's just I don't know. It's fascinating to me as you as a CEO, particularly, to slow down enough to look back.
Well, all this is interesting. So for a minute, let's talk about, hey, I pivot the business. I need to convince, and we talked about it last time, that somehow I go, leadership is inspiring people to believe in something. There's a belief shift there. We used to do this thing. Now we're doing that. You got to go to private equity, VC, and get funding. You got to convince them that this is the right path to even invest. So talk about that transition, because there had to be something for you guys. And I go, yeah, we're 2.5. Our revenue went up. There's a model here. There's a win here, but it's still we were a wholesaler, and now we're going to move and be a we'll call it tech company for a moment. We'll get to more of that here in a minute, but you got to first convince people internally and externally that this is the right move. Talk a little
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, I think that's a it's actually a very interesting way to frame that. Yeah, I think the from a tech perspective in the VC world that we're in, that was a not an easy thing to do, but an easier than to get the entire exec team on the same path, right? And it kind of
Well,
goes back to the logic of what how we talk about things. We naturally talk about how it affects the execution or the path forward, right? So when this the outcome of the quote is because of we're going to get a booking, right? So the VC path was again not easy, but we were grateful enough to find a couple of good partners that believed in our story. Um, we actually it was a $5 million round, and it was okay. Go prove it, right? Go prove that you're going to improve this workflow or air freight cargo. And then we kind of I wouldn't say kind of pivoted again, but it just became more clarity, right? It became more understood of what solution or problem we're actually solving. We're not actually solving the quote, right? We're solving the promise of the quote to the person that owns the commitment to from the buyer, right? And to be fair, that was probably a 3 week ago aha moment. It's like, oh,
mhm.
we're talking about it wrong, right? We're not it's not landing because we're talking about the same layer that they do on the execution side.
So you reference there, hey, I get VC funding, we get the round, they're saying go prove it. There obviously was enough data for them to believe, like, hey, here's what we did internally, here's what we're seeing, applied across the business, here's the opportunity. I mean, VCPE is very uh understanding of the promise. And if you show any indication of the promise, they'll go, great. Um, Yet you said internally a much harder battle. So talk about that for a few minutes. Like, hey, we've always done this. Now we're going to go do that. I'm sure everyone is like, well, this has changed. That's fear. You know, that creates a bunch of uncertainty that makes people nervous.
Yeah, and in our case, I'm not sure it was making him nervous, because I think they all saw the end result, right? Like, I think
Okay, good.
they understood what our mission was, right? Is to elevate. We were always about elevating the industry in terms of the people, right? Like, how do we improve the industry? But I think the lens that was flipped for us, which was very hard, particularly for me, because I thought you understood. Like, you can have a conversation, and we think we're aligned, but the reality is that language or those words mean different things depending on what how you're looking at the problem, right? And so, like in our case, or what I believe we've learned, um, is that it's really a different workflow, right? So the workflow that decides whether a customer promise is should be made in the first place is different than the output of the quote. And so keep fighting and not fighting is not the right word, but keep pressure testing language was probably the hardest thing internally to do. It's like, Chris, no, I got it. I'm like, nah, but you don't, right? You're right. And I think that's a I think it's a common problem, but I think that it's a lot that people that what do you say would people don't like conflict, right? People don't like to be challenged. You know, they know the way, this is the way it's always been, or I know the industry, or I know tech, whatever the scenario is. When you challenge that, it's important, at least from my perspective, is making sure that we're always testing that limit, right? Like, are we really on the same page? Are we really aligned in our thought? And then once that happens, at least again for me, it's been like, okay, now I can go into the next 5 or 6, 8 steps down the road. I don't have to worry about 1, 2, and 3. I can start working on 4, 5, and 6. And for me, that's a massive weight off my shoulders or my neck, whatever you want to call that stress level. Um, that's been the again, that's been the challenge, right? That we had to overcome.
So in the midst of that transition, I want to go to your workforce for a moment and go, hey, we're a wholesaler doing this. We start to pivot some with tech. We get money and investment. We start to shift. We're going through the learning of, hey, how do we do this? Talk about the transition of, I'll call it the average worker. What happens for them? What does it mean to work at the new Aircon? Is there a shift of responsibility and focus? What happens?
Yes, and yes. Right. So obviously we switched from a kind of a traditional operator lens. We obviously we kept everybody right. From a tech standpoint, we just had to reverse it and change the UI. That's obviously more difficult than that, but um, the tech the tech folks obviously didn't change very much, right? Because they're doing the same thing or similar things. On the operation side or the customer facing folks, we had to reposition, their roles, right? So one went to a customer success manager, and then retraining um, how to ask questions of what success looks like to our customers today versus what they were. That's a process, right? That's a just a continual reinforcement, and not so much what we do, but hey, we can't say that or we don't do this was more important than we do this, right? If that makes logical sense. Knowing what we're not was just as important to knowing who we were or who we are. So we've kept everybody. Obviously, part of that challenge was transitioning their talk track, right, or their logic of what our value is. Right, the value isn't moving the cargo. The value is knowing what the customers are committing to at the time of quote. And naturally, again, I keep going back to this. Naturally, we talk about execution. Like I'll give you an example. Today, I was talking to a company that sells delayed insurance, right? And so the process that we talked through, or what we got to was, okay, we'll do a connection, but we will never book through you, right? So you're not going to charge me. We're not going to do anything, but we will. If the customer wants it, at least they have an option for this type of insurance. And but the value didn't show up in that part. The value showed up in the time walking through the execution side of it, right? So when would the insurance pay? What commodities, like pharma, for example, or perishables, if it's delayed by 12 hours, the freight forwarder or the buyer may not pay for it, right? It's bad. Um, but now if you have, as a freight forwarder, have that as an option, maybe it costs you an extra $50. Well, now you can guarantee automotive, pharma, et cetera, based on transit time. Once that cargo is on the actual craft. And so, and I say all that because that's part of the challenge, right? The part of the challenge is we talk about the effects of what we're doing, and then we have to go back and say, okay, what decisions need to be made if I want to choose X, Y, or Z, right? If not, it just becomes cost.
Got it. Um, so, and I assume in the old world, when you're operating as a wholesaler, you're like, well, now a lot of that's on us. Like,
It was all on us, right?
yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was.
yeah. This is a different world of like, well, now it's on someone else, but we need to make sure that the customer understands the decision tree, how they're quoting, what it looks like, and are we solving the right problem for
That's
them,
right.
right?
That's right. But it's
All right.
interesting too. Is our CTO? His name's Dennis, and he's brilliant. It's kind of funny. Is I don't. There's no decision tree. There's no decision tree, and I'm like, but for layman people like you and I, there's always it's if this then this. Like no, it's got to just not. It's just not two paths. Now it's three paths, right? It's do I quote it? Do I reject it? Ask for more information, or do I escalate to the human? Right?
Yeah.
That's still a decision tree, right? In my brain,
Right.
but it's not the traditional
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah. And well, and you have, I mean, in today's world, we can assimilate, gather a ton more data. We can analyze it. We can ask the right question. I mean, the world's changed, and we talked a little bit about that last time, just with the power of AI. So you start to transition the team, you transition the business, you get some money. Talk about the last 6 months on what's happened.
Yeah, so obviously the first step is how do we get PMF, right? Like we got this great idea, we got some people using the system, but we haven't really like got PMF yet, right? And it's funny. Today we actually got our probably our largest our contract isn't signed. He said he'll sign it tomorrow, but it's like 45x our largest contract, right? And so it's like, oh, that's PMF. Like if we start getting these dominoes to fall, that's PMF. Um, but the challenge with all that is believing what you're building is like you build it and they will come, right? Like it's kind of the challenge, right? It's because the
Yeah.
product got to be good enough for people to see value in it, and then the language on what that arc is between the problem you're solving and the problem that they're feeling, right? Because most people, or let I say most people, me and myself included, speed to market was we thought the problem we were solving, right? When this thing started, it was like, well, no, we're just going to quote faster, right? Like 24/7, 365, under 2 minutes. Um, that's the problem we're solving. What we find out, that's just the first hook, right? That gets them in the door. That doesn't that then that's just a part of the tool, right, or part of the
Yeah.
solution, right? And
Yeah. Well,
the,
I assume to simplify it, Chris, that it becomes there is a speed to quote, but there's also quality and are we quoting the right thing? Like,
that's right.
like even the quote can be right, but you're like, but we quoted XYZ and what we really need is something completely different quoted. We didn't quote that.
Yep. No, a
Yeah.
1000%. And and again, language matters in a lot of different ways, right? Because like one of the things that's powerful about AI, it can read all this stuff almost instantly, right? Like there's very little time, right? Hey, if this, go find, go to this thing. But it's not the AI is not the solution, right? AI is a tool that's part of the solution, and the industry. There's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of noise about AI and automation, um, and in fact, it was this weekend that I had an aha moment. It's like, that's why I get upset when people say, clean your data, clean your data. Well, they're solving a different problem than we're solving with AI, right? So we're at the, what do we do with the input and then put it through a decision, lack for a better way, a decision tree or a bunch of different APIs at once and bring it back to respond to the quote based on the guardrails or decisions that the forwarder already made. But when I hear clean your data, I hear that's automation, right? Which is very valuable and very needed, but it's just not the same problem we're solving.
Yeah. I mean, to me, to instead of this decision tree, there's an analysis, right? You're analyzing the problem.
That's right.
Yeah, and again, we could go deep into, we'll use medicine as an example. I'm analyzing and diagnosing. Okay, well, there is likely somewhere in there some decision tree, but it's a more complex thing than and you've alluded to it, a linear decision tree where you go, well, it's step one, step two. There's a bunch of variables that may take us in who knows what direction.
Well, and like our industry in the air cargo industry, it's highly fragmented, right? And there's so many different providers, and there's like the freight forward. Again, I keep going back to the freight forwarder having to try to keep this all in their head, right? Like who do they go for what, and then what is the risk tolerance? All that kind of information is not. It is readily available, but it's not all in one place, right? And it's not at the time of the request. So that's the other thing that we from a value standpoint is we are analyzing all that data or all that information at the time of the request of the quote, right? So before rates, hey, I get rates on email, right? Like even today I get probably 15 or 20 people saying, hey, I got rates out of US or rates out of China. Well, it doesn't do me a lot of good if I don't have the need at the time the data point comes in, right? And so again, that's why I think AI is very powerful because it doesn't. I can do 1,000 different touch points very quickly with just building different agents to do all those things. So the AI isn't necessarily the value. The AI is just the unlock, right? It's the unlock to get what problem we're trying to solve, right? So reading the email, how to respond, and folks that think that the world's going to change overnight with AI, it might, right? But in air cargo specifically, there's still value in assets. There's still value in coordination. There's still value in knowing your buyer needs to again the levers or whatnot if you want to pull on margin or providers. All that stuff still matters, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
So Chris, in the last 6 months, we've touched on it, but if you think about, well, here was my leadership team challenge. Here's what I needed to get them to do. Here's the transition, the change, the new mindset, the shift, the hey, we're more productive, we're more effective, we're more whatever. What were the challenges for? I'll just start with the leadership team to get there.
All talking the same language, right? That was the absolutely the hardest thing for me is when I'm talking when I'm talking to tech, I can talk tech lingo or tech dialogue, whatever, whatnot. And when I'm talking to an operator, it means X, Y, or Z. So I got to be careful not to use this particular word like, quote book shit, right? That's not a linear process. It's quote, which has a ton of logic that needs to go into there on why and the secret sauce of the freight forwarder. And then the book is the commitment from the buyer to the freight forwarder then also then book the freight forwarder to the assets or the providers of that service. So it's not a linear line, and explaining that, or it just takes time, right? It knowing how do I no no no, no I want to say that in a different way. There's no they. I think was the biggest challenge that I from a CEO perspective had to realize that, yeah, someone's opinion may matter and I need to take that into consideration. But once we set the direction, we're going. And any drift on that has to, like, we got to knock that off right away.
So I hear that, and what I hear inside that, Chris, could be, hey, we're still trying to figure it out. So there's a mindset of, well, we're trying to figure it out. And instead you go, well, no, we've all committed and we're doing this thing
That's right.
until we determine this thing is wrong. This is the path.
That's right.
And
That's right.
was there some of that challenge where,
There was a lot of
well,
that challenge early
okay,
on. And then, bit by bit, it would click, right?
yeah,
And
because all of it's unknown, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
part of the
that's right.
he's like, hey, we're still trying to figure this out. Or to use the air metaphor, like, well, we've taken off and now we're trying to build the plane as we're flying. We're not sure exactly what we're doing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
for organizations, that communication, clarity, direction, I think Drucker said it best. Only three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. And that the leadership team, if we're not aligned, then no one else will be.
That's right.
And that's why I asked that question first. So there's a common direction path. Are we committed all to the same thing? How well are we doing that? And in that, it sounds like, even recently as 3 weeks ago today, you're still learning, and that's always the case. And so how is the leadership team navigating, I'll call it subtle shift in direction?
So they get excited, right? So again, when they see it, you can see them elevate in terms like, oh, that's what you meant 6 months ago, or that's what you meant, 2 weeks ago. But the biggest challenge is from a leadership perspective, as you go from an operator, kind of, the battle scars of being the doer. Uh, you have this tribal knowledge in your head that this is the way it should be, right? Or this is the way it is, and it's hard to elevate on top of that to say correct, and we're changing it for the better because of X, Y, and Z. Um, and I think the
So is there a fallback to comfort there? This is my
yeah,
known.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Hey, I know this, right? Or hey, we're going to get here, and this is what I know, so this is my lane I'm going to stay in. And when you're and as you're leading, especially again into a new category, it's, oh, I don't trust my own thought, like my own words sometimes, right? Like, did I stutter or whatnot? In fact, I just had a conversation with our co-founder Earl, and I said, "Hey, like, I know we're aligned, but like, repeat it back to me, kind of what we're saying, because I sense that you're not seeing something that I'm seeing." And his comment to me was, "No, I get it, and I'm excited for it. I'm just trying to figure out how to my own mental process before I go forward, right? So I got to retrain my brain to not just rely on my old habits, right?
Um, I always go to in these scenarios. So, of course, we always go to our own experience.
Of
And my
course.
own experience is that this is solved a little bit by our cadence. Like, how
Mhm.
often are we meeting? What does it look like in our meeting cadence? Are we battling this out enough? Back to, Lencioni or someone else's five dysfunction. Are we having healthy conflict? Are we deciding where we're going? Is it clear at the end of the meeting that this is our direction until we meet again? Um, it, did you use cadence effectively to solve some of this, or what has allowed you to solve it?
So for me, I do like the cadence slash, I call it rhythm, right? What's our rhythm, right? That each week. Um, the way that I solved it was separating the conversations, right? So if we're all in a big group, right, from product to tech to operations to customer success or sales, there's a very different language or conversations. And so I would be I started about 3 or 4 months ago being very specific about, no, your role is different. Staying, like, I need your lens to be here, your lens to be here. Because if not, everything blends it just bleeds into each other. And obviously I think it worked, but now it's coming back together, right? So now it's okay. I separated everybody out kind of in a threes, if you will, for lack of a better way to say it. So product, tech, and me, operations, sales, and me, finance, ops, and me. Like so, I structured it in a way in terms of the conversations to make
Okay.
sure that the language was clear and the language was consistent. Because how we talk to customers is very differently how we talk about tech. Like for example, we have F0, F1, F2 to which is part of our tech architect on how we're responding. Well, F1's a freight forwarder, right? Like, oh, who's the F1? Well, the F1 is our customer, right? So I can explain it internally, but I can't use that language externally, right? Because they don't know what
Yeah.
F1 is, right?
Yeah.
Or F0, um, for that matter, which is just the provider, right? Or not just, but like from a layer standpoint, it's the asset or the provider of the service where you get your rate.
So we'll shift to early signs of success. You've shared some like, hey, we have this 45 times our largest that's likely. But you're still early days of success. I always like those moments where you're like, oh, well, we're winning here. There's positive traction. What are the early indications that you're doing things well and that there will be a win?
So I think that goes in steps, right? So early on, obviously we got money, right? Someone believed that the idea was good enough to give us, several $1 million, which is always a first sign. Um, the second sign that I got was I could attract high talent or good talent, right? People saw, you could talk and, from a product manager, from a sales to tech. So our technical founder, obviously, again, you could sell it to people that, hey, this is what we're building and this is going to be really
Yeah.
cool.
So
Um,
so so I'll go back to because I say this all the time that there's an inspirational story that you can inspire people to believe. They're going, yeah, I see it. I want this. I want to do it. And I always go, well, then we got to take action toward it. We have the dream. Now we got to go build the dream.
right.
So
And again, that's kind of part of the challenge though, right? Is like, it's like, yeah, you inspire them, they join the team and obviously everybody like and I told Earl early on when he started, I'm like, I won't screw you, intentionally screw you, but you may get screwed, right? At the end of the day, like that's not our intent, but this is where we're going. So if we have that kind of mindset, like, hey, we're going, let's go. But the challenge with that is, at least from my perspective, is especially at an executive team, like it can't be all in my head, right? Like you got like everybody's got plays a very specific role, and has a very specific talent that we need all of this to work together for us to be successful. And so we don't have PMF yet. Like I don't no claim to fame there on that yet. But it's Julian, my
so
schematic
help the
venture,
audience with PMF, Chris.
product market fit, right? So um, product market fit, which PMF. Julian, I go, well, how do I asked him one day, I'm like, well, how will I know we have it? And he goes, Chris, it's kind of like porn. You may not know how to describe porn, but once you see it, you know what it is, right? And PMF is the same thing, right? It's like once you have it, it'll just go. And that's why I'm so excited about this last deal that we should sign because it's a
Well, and
big
you'll
one.
have more people saying yes, more people
Yes,
saying, I see the value and I'm willing to hand you recurring revenue to go do
that,
this thing over and
that's
over
right.
for us.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? Like it's again, especially when it's at least in my mind, when it's a new category that they don't know and they just think it's a quote and they think they can go to a platform and get a rate because it's not about the rate, right? Because the quote's the output. It's been a fun journey, right? For lack of a better way to say it, um, so I'm excited to see what it does. Which obviously I think
So,
what we believe what we're building. I think everybody on our team believes what we're building. Um, Now we just got to be able to explain it and get people on board.
so Chris, to recap, hey, I got money, I got talent on board. Once we have this PMF and we're clicking, that'll be the next sign. And then I would assume you'll see recurring revenue. Like this will
That's right.
just start to click and then scale. If we had this conversation 3 years from now, and I said, you'll be successful if what's happened 3 years from now?
Well, obviously we're global, whatnot. We're doing, we're solving. We continue to solve or add to the forwarder's value, right? So insurance, customs brokerage, all these kind of different things in each different country. But our first step is to get to that 1.5 million ARR by the end of the year. That's our first step, and um, we're well on our way now.
Awesome. And would you say likely at this point? Do you look and go, yeah, I'm confident we'll get there?
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
absolutely. Yeah, I actually, we'll see. We have enough conversations going on that the goal is 3 million by the end of the year with the floor 1.5. I'm fairly confident that we'll hit that 3 million.
So, I mean, there's a nice lesson in this if you step back from all of that and go, hey, before pivot, revenue roughly what?
Like 5.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
4.55. And so you go, well, if I can finish the year at three ARR and I continue to grow at that rate, I'm 18 months and I'm ahead of where I was.
yeah. Well,
All right.
and from a value perspective, again, going talking about money, right? That a valuation on a wholesale business is 3 to 5x. A valuation on ARR is much higher.
Yeah. We'll call it 10 plus likely, depending on what's going on. Yeah. So that's all like really awesome. And um, it's easy for people to point to and go, oh, well, of course. Yet you're living well, it's not the of course. It takes a lot to pivot, to change, to get people to move and do that. If you had to tell people, and you've done it, but I want to double down on it, like the biggest challenge in that has been what?
Um, Lots of big challenges. I think the biggest challenge for me is to slow down. Right? Don't push through it. Don't chase deals. Um, spend. I spend a lot of time reflecting on the day. Well, what did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Um, I use AI a lot to figure this, my thoughts out, if you will. Um, and then ask questions to your respected peers, right? So, like, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I posted something on LinkedIn on Saturday, and then I did probably 18 or 25 conversations via WhatsApp of people around the world. It's like, hey, I would like your perspective on this. And as the responses came back, it was again just different perspectives. Like, hey, this is an operator lens thinking as an insurance policy type logic. This is different incentives on these guys. They're not collaborative. So taking in all that information and slowing down that, hey, you may not have all the answers, but you have a big network to go ask questions, and people
Yeah.
want to help if you ask them for opinions and their perspectives.
I'm curious in all of this. So, kind of in the pivot or even earlier, almost every business owner CEO has had a moment where you're like, I don't know if this damn thing's going to work. And you may have had multiple, but is there something you can cite and go, yeah, here's where I was really frustrated. Here's where, because, we framed this as positive and you're pushing through it, but I always like to have everyone reflect for a moment where, like, yeah, let me go back to March 10th where I'm like, this is a failure and this isn't going to happen. Have you had any of those heavy moments where you're like, yeah, this was,
I've definitely had doubts, don't get me wrong, right? Like, along the way, it's like, am I seeing this or hearing this? Whatever like, December when we strategically walked away from this business because I knew at that point the language was we were going to compete against wholesalers, and we don't want to compete against them because we want all of them on our platform to give access to our customer, the freight forwarder, right? Because that was the whole deal, right? Was how do we help freight forwarders compete at scale? Now that's pivoted a little bit to be how do we help freight forwarders know what they're committing to at the time of quote, right? And elevate them from an industry standpoint and separating on those lines. So definitely had some doubts along the way. I would say the biggest doubt was December of 2025 when I had to make that decision of we're getting rid of all this revenue. We're going to start from zero, and 80% of the customers didn't sign our new contract, right? Because they saw us as a wholesaler and didn't want to pay for the subscription, even though we heavily discounted this first year as we were building the product. I think the second doubt was, being in a board meeting, right? And we're not closing deals, right? Like, oh, we still got to do this. We got to get the system, we got to do the admin panel. We got to get providers, right? We got to be able to show and demonstrate that the product does what we say it's going to do or does, and not just in, in the US, right? It's got to be global. You got to be, those type of things. So having the board say, get one deal. I'm like, yeah, we're not quite ready to do that yet, but we're close, right? And over and over and over, I shouldn't say over and over like it's a long, massive period of time, but that creates doubt, right? Hey, are we doing the right things? And is it just a timing issue? Because it's obviously somebody else's. In this case, it's VC money, right? We have a responsibility to steward that well.
So you get through that. There's positive signs. Things are doing well. On a go forward, if you could change one thing, magic wand, hey, change this today, what would it be?
Protectivism, or I'm not sure if that's the right word, but in air cargo specifically, there's everybody's protecting their own interest per se, but yet they talk collaboratively, right? Like, hey, and knowing who your customer is, I think is a severe challenge in our industry, um, and where the commitment sits in terms of that process, right? Um, but everybody, how do I say this in a different, maybe more polite way, is understanding what each person in the value chain where they add value and not just cost. I think is if I could have a magic wand, it's like, okay, you're a wholesaler, right? Your value is X, Y, and Z. You're protecting capacity on the airlines by leveraging your buying power and you're reselling it to smaller freight forwarders to compete, right? So it's a
Well,
different,
sadly, Chris, it's like, well, what I need to do is educate the market, is what you're
yeah.
saying. Um, which is, but because many just get used to this is what we do. Like this is our process, right? Like this is we do this thing and we get paid. Do you understand why you're getting paid? In many cases, they're like, not really.
Well, that's an interesting point that you said. You gotta understand why are they paying you, right? I think is a another way to frame that instead of knowing your value. Oh, why are you getting paid, and what value are you bringing to that chain? I think is that's very insightful.
Yeah, no, and there's always a a component of education in any business. Like, well, are we teaching the market anything? And the more we do that, the more people will move our way. Um,
Do want to
y-
add there? I do think there's when you talk about signs in the market, and so I want to encourage for people again to listen to your customers, right? So the most positive thing I got last week was from another customer. It says, "Chris, I already see the value." Did I freeze?
no,
Okay. I already see the value, and I haven't even used your platform yet, right? And so there's again, it's not you're not we're not there yet, but take the wins along the way. That okay, yes, we're on the right track. Um, we're on the right path.
awesome. Um, as you pause on all the things you've gone through in the last, we'll call it, couple years, I always go, what would you tell others that are facing anything similar? Here's a nugget of wisdom. Here's some advice. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I would pass on.
The yeah, the cliche one, right, is know your network, right, and get people around you that are like minded, um, and talk and ask questions on, hey, am I seeing this right, or I'm thinking that here's the problem, is and this don't. And I think we as men do this more than we probably should. Is we go to solutioning much faster before we understand that the problem is right. So
Well, earlier you were saying something, and this is, I reflect on this all the time on my own journey, helping others in the journey. We hear a problem, we start solving it. And if we pause, then we're more curious about the problem. And I use an analogy all the time. I'll share it with the audience because I may not have. Is that I pause when I hear a problem and go, do I understand the impact of the problem? And for me, my bull metaphor, I go, it's hurt. It's hours, emotion, resources, and dollars. And so until I understand that the problem causes those things and get curious with you, Chris, if it's that, like, well, is there more an emotional problem here? Like, are you losing sleep over this? Is this I'm wasting a bunch of hours? Am I having to throw a bunch of money? And in the end, I'm spending money. I'm losing money. There's opportunity. There's something. And as soon as I can help them understand versus like, okay, there's the problem. Let me solve it for you. Many times the buyer or person you're helping solve the problem has no idea the impact. And so when you then go, well, I can solve it and here's the dollar amount, they're like, so you're just going to make me pay more? And if we don't help them understand the impact of the problem, and that's not a new concept. That's a Neil Rackman spin selling, and you can go all the way back to all the early sales models, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of, well, what is the problem and what's the impact? So I appreciate
Yeah, and
that.
I haven't read that book, but, definitely been enough sales, training and sales, yeah, it's been embedded in my head, but I think the challenge for me has been, the problem is obvious, right? Yeah, duh, but selling it is they don't see it as a problem, right? They don't see that, hey, you quoted Gen Cargo when there was hazmat on it, and now you just lost $10,000 on a bad quote, or
Yeah.
or
Well,
they don't even know their income from, right? Or they don't know
I mean,
their demand.
well, it goes back to that. Can I educate? Can I ask the question? Can I be curious? Can I walk them down uh, an old sales model I talked about is that what you really want to do is get the buyer to sell themselves.
Yeah,
That you walk them through a series of questions and answers where in the end they're going, oh, well, I should have been doing this a year ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Versus
that
us going, here's the pay me money to solve it. Them to go, oh, and you said that with one of your clients, like, I already see the value. And I used to joke with salespeople and go, are some salespeople will find that client who sees the value and is willing to pay. If your normal client doesn't see it, then they're not going to be willing to pay.
yep,
And
that's it.
so there's a big aha in the audience for that to think about, like, well, how do I understand the problem? What's the impact? How do I slow down?
Well, that
Anything else you would add to the audience as
yeah, well,
advice?
I think the big challenge for me is, what is a feature, what is a tool, what is value, right? I always assumed value was cost, right? I'm going to save you X amount of money, or I'm going to reduce this amount of headcount. That's not our value, right? From an Aircon perspective, but you have to be able to articulate it in a manner that they get that kind of, I call it the light bulb moment. And you can see it when you're on calls, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like I get it now, what you're trying to say, or the differentiation between what you're selling and what you're providing.
Yeah, awesome. If listeners, Chris, want to follow your journey, Aircon, where should they go?
LinkedIn's the best way to go. It Chris Condon, CHRISCONDON. We're also obviously online, aircon.ai. But LinkedIn is probably my favorite because we can engage without strings attached.
Yes, awesome. Chris, remarkable conversation today. Really enjoyed it. A bunch of candor, a bunch of lessons. Many entrepreneurs will face the same challenges, and hopefully they'll do it as well as you've outlined. And still, proof will be in the pudding. You're on the journey, but it sounds like there's some remarkable things ahead. So, thanks for sharing all of that story today.
Well, David, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope to stay in touch.
Thanks.